All the doctor would say that it's a very healthy young boy. Aizawa calling the cops, as them arriving about 2 minutes later, Aizawa would take the man into custody, as pretty much after that, Aizawa would make his way to the hospital, which was only about a 10-minute jog from there. So rushing there as fast as he could, Aizawa would eventually make his way into the office, being greeted by Midnight, the doctor, President Mike, and even his parents, saying something along the lines of, "So it looks like I was late," as everybody would start cheering, being like, "He's so freaking cool!" President Mike screaming, causing the baby to cry, as Aizawa would ask Midnight if she really had to do all of this, her saying that she absolutely had to, saying that they all wanted to be here to support this. As I was smiling at the young boy, as looking into his eyes, we would suddenly have a massive time skip to a 14-year-old Izuku who would be training alongside Aizawa, telling him that he needs to lift his foot up higher when he throws kicks, and to focus more on his aim rather than how hard he's pulling on the scarf. Izuku at this moment going through the stages of learning how to actually use the scarf that Aizawa used, beat him up regardless of what he does. He's no good at fighting, he would say. Leaving Midnight, who watching nearby would say that she'll handle it. Going into the room of Izuku, and in her own strange motherly way of putting things, it just seems so weird.
この幸せな毎日がたまに怖くなります。寝て起きたら夢だったなんてことないですよね。もう食べられないよ。寝て起きたら夢だったなんてことないですよね。砂糖がないなら代わりにケーキを食べればいいじゃない。いいじゃないじゃない。私は床で寝ますのでお気になさらず。ちゃんとお弁当持ちましたか？何でしょう、ご主人様。こんな私のどこがいいんですか？寝て起きたら夢だったなんてことないですよね。ご主人様お好きですね。エッチなことはダメです。私たちにはまだ早いのです。お腹すきましたね。そういう行為は他のメイドさんたちにお願いします。食べられないよ。何を食べに行くんですか？ワクワク。
She would pretty much go on to cheer Izuku up, telling him that he needs to get out there and learn how to fight, explaining that, believe it or not, her old man actually used to suck at fighting. Izuku turned into Midnight and saying that there's no way. His dad's always been the coolest. The goggles, the scarf, the hair, everything, but he just, I don't know, he feels like he's chasing a shadow. I mean, he's not a flashy hero, and he knows he never will be because of the quirk that he was born with, but he at least wants to match up somewhat to his father. But it seems like he's just developing so slowly, saying, "Look, Mom, I know you're trying to make me feel better, but I'm not tall, I'm not muscular, as much as I try to be, and I don't know, I guess it's just a lot sometimes when I try to live up to what you and Dad can do." Yes, Mom. And Dad, he's like Batman. As I was listening to this conversation outside the room with a smile, as knowing that, Midnight will handle this, he would walk out that room. This is when Izuku, finally turning towards his mom standing out from the bed, he would say, "But what am I supposed to do? Like, seriously, the entrance exam is in 6 months, and I don't know if I'm gonna be strong enough by then. I've been trying to learn how to use this scarf ever since I can remember, but I don't know, something or another always seems to get in my way. Maybe I can try using a whip?" Him having a little image of what he would look like trying to like dress like his mom and use a whip. He's like, "Never mind. I think I'll stick with a scarf." Her saying to go back outside and stop overthinking it so much. Izuku doing exactly that, as finally Aizawa seeing him, training outside, would then pretty much go outside and tell him to know one thing, that as much as he makes it look easy, it took him years to develop this, saying that he actually has it easy. He gets to learn off of all the dumb mistakes that he made along the way, and he's not working with a prototype, he's working with the real thing. Izuku turning towards his father and telling him that he knows, and that he promises that within these 6 months, he'll learn how to do it. He'll spend mornings, night times, and heck, even school times if he has to. Aizawa wrapping him up with his scarf is turning on his quirk, he would tell him to not even think about that. Izuku chuckling nervously, as he would say that he wasn't really thinking about that too seriously. Aizawa undoing the scarf, as he would tell him to go back to his training again. Izuku practicing some martial arts, couple judo techniques, and then finally going back to working on the scarf. Izuku doing a little bit of working out throughout the next 6 months that he had to get ready for the entrance exam, as Izuku, shockingly enough, would actually have pulled off what he said. Not necessarily mastering the scarf like his father, because that comes with experience and time, but good enough to the point where he feels confident in taking the scarf into the entrance exam. So, with the day finally coming, Izuku would make his way towards UA. Him not having been told a thing about what the exam was going to be like, because in Aizawa's words, he's not going to be giving his son any sort of leg ups on the other students. Midnight kind of thinking that that's the right approach, as Izuku would walk in blind, acing the written exam, being way more smart than he even is in the original, and then making his way to the practical portion where finally having found out that he's fighting against robots, pretty much his worst matchup, Izuku would feel irritated, wondering why it is that his dad always tried to make his life difficult. I mean, since Izuku can remember, Aizawa's always been hard on him, and he doesn't really get why. I mean, would it have been so bad to have told him he was going to be fighting against robots, so maybe he could try to bring in some sort of support item to help him? His fists aren't exactly going to be doing too good clashing against metal, but nonetheless, Izuku would make his way towards one of the robots as soon as the test starts, rushing towards a one-pointer, dodging the blow from the robot, which he would see as coming at him in practically slow motion, since Aizawa had always been fighting against him full throttle, or not full throttle, but he's used to taking on a literal pro hero in Aizawa, so something like this was nothing to Izuku. He would use his scarf to wrap up the robot just long enough for Izuku to then drop it on the ground, and then finally whack at that thing with his fist, until suddenly from the corner of his eye, Izuku would see a switch on these robots. Wait, there's a kill switch. That's why he didn't tell me anything. I don't have to go around blowing these things up. I just need to restrain them long enough so that I can turn them off with a kill switch. Izuku making his way towards a couple more robots, and now, finally having some confidence in himself, Izuku using his scarf to wrap them up and using all the strength in his body that he's been building up over the last 6 months to hold them still long enough for himself to be able to turn off multiple robots, eventually accumulating 18 robot points, until eventually rumbles in the ground would start being heard, and as Izuku would look up, having just barely restrained a robot and turned it off, Izuku would see a multitude of students running away, Izuku noting that the zero-pointer was closing in and thinking that he's not wasting his time with it. But just as that would happen, Deku would overhear the screams of a girl, Uraraka having been caught underneath some rubble and then twisted her ankle, so Deku's body would just move, him rushing to the direction of Uraraka, as looking and analyzing the entire situation, Izuku would then throw his scarf over one of the random lampposts that would be nearby, as wrapping it around Uraraka's arm, he would pull, using it as a pulley device, making it so that he didn't have to pull her full weight, seeing as Deku, though he is strong, probably wasn't even going to be able to get her out of there fast enough. And that would work, because in that moment, Uraraka would be flung out of the direction of the zero-pointer long enough for Deku to actually use that lamppost itself as a method of keeping him out of danger's way, wrapping the scarf around something else and grabbing onto Uraraka as telling her to hold on tight. Deku would, like his entire face would turn red, him holding himself up with one arm as holding Uraraka in the other. Deku would be so grateful at the fact that she's not that heavy, because had she been, Deku honestly might have dropped her and himself. And so, as Deku and Uraraka would land, the zero-pointer having been deactivated due to Nezu knowing that, it could have caused them a lot of danger, he would ask if she's okay. Her being like, yeah. All the while Aizawa having been watching from the staff room, would have a smile on his face, knowing that with that little performance, Izuku 100% just got himself into the hero course. A bit disappointed that it took him as long as it did for him to find out about the kill switch, but hey, if he's in, he's in. And so with that being the case, Deku would make his way home, where arriving there, he would ask his mom where his father was at, wanting to question him about why he didn't feel the need to tell him that information. But she would say that he's already asleep, him walking into the room and seeing that Aizawa was already comfy in his sleeping bag and he hadn't even made it to the bed. Izuku in this moment would roll his eyes, thinking that he probably just wanted to avoid talking to him. Him going to his room, where Izuku would start lifting some weights because he had like a whole gym in his room, having wanted to get as strong as possible and actually starting to see some results. Before, Deku was not exactly the buffest kid ever, because mind you, I mean, he was 13 and he hadn't really started seriously working out until he was 12 years old at 13, because Aizawa and Midnight were like, nah, you're not stunting your growth, boy. So Izuku, was relatively strong. Now he's finally starting to pack up some muscle, and now he looks more similar to the Izuku that we get in the original canonical story. with the added bonus of having some pretty decent martial arts, because the only reason the Deku thinks he sucks is because he's comparing himself to his old man, Aizawa. But in reality, Deku got some hands, I'm not gonna lie. At least in comparison to what his dad was doing when he was at UA, because Izuku's hands are already at the level of like second year Aizawa. And you'll see what I'm talking about soon, because we're now gonna move on to Izuku's first day of school, which would be pretty interesting because what with Deku going to school with Aizawa, that means that Deku would likely be the first one of the class. Him pretty much reading a book with some headphones on, as eventually people would start finally filling the classroom. Him excited to see who's actually going to be there and what kind of friends he's going to be having over the course of these next couple of years. Also taking his time to examine some of the girls that would walk inside because, teenage boy. And then as Deku would be doing all this, he would suddenly be interrupted to the sound of Ida and Bakugo arguing, which would lead Deku to look at them and just immediately have that, oh, they don't even know what they're in for face, knowing that his father was soon to wake up. And how right would he be? Because he would immediately wake up wrapping a scarf around Ida's face, telling him to shut up already, that he's an even bigger nuisance than this brat with his feet on the desk. Ida saying, I was just trying to, as Aizawa would tell him to shut up and sit down, telling everybody that the next time that it takes them longer than this to shut up, they'll all be expelled, telling them to throw these on and make their way outside, as Araka would ask, but what about orientation? Him telling her that this class doesn't run the way they're expecting. At UA they have 3 years to mold them into perfect heroes, and he's not going to waste a day throwing them into a room so they can hear about how great they are. They've had enough of that their entire lives, telling them all to follow, as pretty soon, the entire class would be right next to Aizawa, who going on to give them a slight speech about how all their lives they've been told that they're all equal, he would then throw the ball to Bakugo, telling him to use his quirk within the range of that circle and get as far as he can. Bakugo smirking as knowing that this is possibly the best test for him, he would squeeze the ball and toss it as far as he possibly could, getting a grand score of 756 meters. Stunning the class would be like, that's awesome! Deku immediately knowing what was to come next, because whenever he got excited at his training, Aizawa made sure to set him right. And that's exactly what would happen, because after the students would get a little excited, he'd mention to calm them all down by telling them that there's going to be some real stakes to this. Following that up by threatening to expel the person in last place, as everybody would immediately lock in. Deku feeling a shiver down his spine as knowing that his father's probably serious about that, Deku would end up doing the best that he absolutely could on the test. But due to the fact that Deku doesn't have a showy quirk, I don't think there's any real reason for me to get into the details of how it actually plays out. So, let's just move on to the following day. After the first day of class would finally be over and Aizawa would expel the person in last place, which honestly I'd like to think would be Mineta, we would then end up going home, where Izuku would tell his father that he never believed he actually expelled people, Aizawa telling him that he better believe it now, Izuku asking how he did during those tests when he was at his age, Midnight giving him a little bit of a laugh with Aizawa saying that that's not important. Us kind of having like a little bit of a throwaway scene as we just pretty much just jumped into the next day at school. The students all going through the motions of a regular day, kind of being like, damn, like UA kind of feels like a regular school day. All of them talking amongst themselves at lunch period, where they would finally all begin to ask questions about their quirks, why they're here, and yada yada yada. Deku actually finding him sitting next to Uraraka, Ida, and Momo Yaoyorozu, with this kind of being the little friend group that Deku has in this timeline. At this, Suzuki would go on to say that he's always been wanting to become a hero, explaining that ever since he found out both of his parents were actually heroes himself, it practically became not even a choice for him. He has to do this. Everybody being like, wait, what? Like your parents are heroes? Asking Deku who his parents are. Deku being like, really? It's not obvious? My old man's Aizawa, and my mom, well, she's another teacher here. Midnight. Momo being like, wow, that is very impressive. So, our homeroom teacher's your father? How does that feel going to school with your dad? Or Rocket being like, that's so cool, that means you must be loaded. Deku smiling as he would say, I wouldn't say loaded. As Ida would say, huh, that's interesting. So it appears that we both come from hero lineages. Izuku being like, oh yeah, right, you come from the engine family, I think it was? With Ida clearing that up, and Momo then explaining that she's always really wanted to become a hero because she thought it was so cool, saying that with her quirk, she was always hoping that she could maybe pull it off, but as she's been getting older and understanding more uses for it, she started to have more confidence with that. Deku saying that she should have been having all the confidence in the world. I mean, a quirk that can literally allow you to make whatever you want whenever you need it? Dude, that is perfect. Her smiling as Izuku would finally ask Araka why she wants to become a hero. Her looking down and being like, well, my reasons aren't as cool as yours. My family's never exactly been rich, so I'm hoping that I could help them out with that. Them all being like, that's a pretty good reason. What are you talking about? Making money as a hero is one of the biggest reasons most people want to do it anyways. Uraraka being a bit unsure of herself, as we pretty much just fast forward to when the students would all finally meet All Might, and he would do his iconic, I am here line coming into the class. After this, he quickly goes on to break down what he's going to be doing here as their teacher, shows them their costumes, and then, well, cue the My Hero music that'd be playing in the background. This would all pretty much end up culminating in the 2v2 battles happening, and just due to the nature of Deku's quirk in this timeline, I actually think it'd be a really cool idea to have him face Bakugo, so we're going to be going with the original timeline fights. Anyways though, as Izuku and Uraraka would make their way towards the building, she would ask him what he's exactly thinking of doing. Him turning towards her with his goggles on, as he would say that his plan is pretty much to cancel their quirks and try to capture them as fast as possible, telling Uraraka that she should probably stay back, only helping once their quirks have been eliminated. Uraraka being like, alright, well I'll do my best, with the two of them making their way up the first floor, eventually starting to hear the sounds of explosions in the distance. This would lead Bakugo to finally turning the corner and screaming out, there you are! His quirk immediately getting cancelled by Deku, as Bakugo would attempt to get into a close range hand-to-hand fight, throwing a big right hook that Deku would actually end up parrying before he would then duck and slammed his fist directly into Bakugo's solar plexus. This would leave him completely out of air for a moment, as Izuku, finally wrapping a scarf around Bakugo, would then tell Uraraka to use her quirk on him. Her touching the boy, who now floating in the air, would make it so that Izuku could have an easier time wrapping the capture tape around him. Bakugo trying to bite at the tape and try to stop it somehow, but it just wasn't working. Bakugo got completely negated in that fight, and he was shown one thing. He has way too much reliance on his quirk. He would probably likely start screaming at Deku, telling him to fight him like a man and to let him use his quirk and all that, but ultimately Deku would not listen to it, just choosing to ignore him, being taught by Aizawa that not saying anything to villains is probably the best thing he can do, and since Bakugo was playing the role of villains, Izuku was thinking that he was doing a damn good job at it. Him making his way towards Ida, who, obviously, would have ended up hiding all his stuff in the room, Uraraka entering, as Izuku would cancel his quirk. From here, the two of them would pretty much end up beating the dude up, and then Uraraka floating him into the air would leave Izuku and Uraraka to both smile, as both of them place their hands on the bomb, and we then hear All Might's voice ring out in their ear, to which Izuku and Uraraka, smiling at each other, would then make their way to the exit of the building. And once there, the two would pretty much be praised by their classmates, being told how incredible their showing was. All Might placing a hand on Izuku, as he would say, nice job, Eraserhead Jr., pretty much showcasing to the entirety of the class that that was indeed Eraserhead's son. I mean, some of them had already had their suspicions because Scarf and the goggles, but now it was pretty much factual. Them all being like, wait, so you really are Eraserhead's son? What's that like? The dude seems like a real jerk between you and me. Izuku just staring blankly, he's like, you know that's my dad, right? They'd be like, yeah, sorry man, but come on, he literally tried to expel us all on the first day. Deku's saying that whoever got expelled deserved to get expelled. This isn't a course for the lucky, it's a course for the people who deserve to be here. You know, them kind of being like, yo, that's kind of tough. As Deku would pretty much end up kind of crossing his arm and just watching everybody else play out. And as Izuku would watch on, Izuku would go on to understand that there's a lot of really powerful people in his class, but among the strongest would be Todoroki, who Izuku can recognize that if he was to shoot his quirk before Izuku could cancel it, it's game over. But in the same vein, if Izuku could somehow manage to erase his quirk before Todoroki gets the chance, then it's over. So Izuku would think that his quirk is pretty cool, glad at the fact that there's not exactly any hulky beasts in his class who could likely probably still beat him up just from their physicality. Well, obviously apart from Shoji, but Izuku's not too worried about him because, you know, he has a scarf. That said, we're now able to jump cut into what happens the day afterwards, which would all revolve around the events of the USJ incident. So, with that beginning, we're able to watch on as Izuku and the class would pretty much enter the USJ. They're given a speech by 13 and then Kurogiri arrives. When this happens, I'd like to think that Deku would immediately go into action mode, Aizawa leaping down to handle some of the other villains that Kurogiri would have warped before, as Izuku using his erasure quirk, he would actually stop Kurogiri from doing anything. So that that means that once Bakugo and Kirishima would lunge towards him, Kurogiri would have no answer to them, meaning that they're able to continuously fight against him. And because Kurogiri can't defend himself against the Pro Hero 13, that likely means that her attack on him would probably have ended up working, taking Kurogiri out of the fight, as Deku, knowing that his dad can't handle all those villains, through gritted teeth, Deku's body would start running downstairs, 13 screaming out, "Izuku, you can't!" as Deku would scream out, "I'm not letting my dad die alone!" This pretty much leaving a bunch of smiles on people's faces, with 3 students all lunging downwards with Izuku: Todoroki, Bakugo, and Kirishima, who would scream out saying, "I can't call myself a man if I let my teacher do everything," hardening immediately as all 4 of them would now join Aizawa downstairs, resulting in all the villains that normally would have given Aizawa issues to all be immediately eradicated. Shigaraki smiling as he would start to pretty much clap his hands together, saying, "Well, Aizawa, it appears that you have a pretty lively classroom. But, you didn't really think we came here without a plan now, did ya?" Signaling to the Nomu to kill him. This is when the Nomu finally screeching and moving, his eyes would dart to the direction of Aizawa, him canceling his quirks, as Aizawa would still be flung backwards, being punched directly in the stomach, flying back like 30 meters? Leaving Deku to watch on in shock that his father just got sent flying like a sack of potatoes. All the while Todoroki would attempt to freeze the Nomu that would break out of it immediately. Deku using his erasure quirk to try to hold that thing back, wondering why it wasn't working, with Shigaraki laughing all the while the students would try their best to hold it down, but nothing was working. Not Todoroki's ice, not Bakugo's explosions, definitely not Kirishima's hardening, because he would be the next one to go, being sent flying backwards, his hardening actually being shattered, with his body having rolled onto the ground, everybody watching that happen in practically slow motion. This leaving the students to pretty much play on the back foot, all the while Shigaraki would sit there laughing, telling the Nomu what to do step by step, eventually noticing that Deku wasn't exactly getting into the fight as much, and rushing towards him. "You know, kid, I don't really like a bystander. So why don't we get rid of you?" Scarf wrapping around his hand as Zuku would erase his quirk and pull him in to kick him in the face. As Shigaraki would be sent down to the ground, he would hold his face, crying out, "Nobu, kill this one!" The Nomu lunging into the direction of Deku, as his fists would connect, but not with Izuku. It would be Aizawa, who having gotten back up would straight up Piccolo that punch. Which, in case you don't get that reference, I'm basically just saying he would take the punch for Deku. Anyways, after that would happen, Shigaraki would start cackling, telling Izuku that he didn't truly believe they stood a chance, did they? Villains don't just show up without a plan. Izuku staring at the giant hulking Nomu before him, his body just kind of locking up as he would look into the Nomu's eyes, which was just bleeding murderous intent. And as the punch would fly, suddenly it would be stopped by a hulking hand. All Might would have just arrived in time to save Deku, who in that moment, finally snapping out of it, would then turn towards his father, who bloodied and beaten on the ground, would pretty much be holding a hand out towards Deku. Izuku looking towards that, as Shigaraki would laugh. "You know, kid, you might have bought yourself a few seconds, but soon as the Nomu's done with All Might, I'll make sure it takes its time with you." Deku wrapping his scarf around Shigaraki's arm as he would scream out, "Shut up!" punching Shigaraki square in the face as Izuku starts to pretty much brutalize Shigaraki. This man starts beating him with every single training of martial arts that he's received over his life, as Izuku would eventually have Shigaraki in a position where he's holding both arms out, similarly to what Sasuke would do in the Forest of Death, and he snaps Shigaraki's arms, turning to him, who now laying on the ground, rage in his eyes staring at Deku. Izuku would spit at the ground, tossing a loogie straight into Shigaraki's face, who having no answer for that would just have to watch on as Deku would rush to Aizawa's aid, asking his dad if he was okay. Aizawa being unresponsive, as Deku would start doing chest compressions on his father, being like, "Dad, Dad, Dad," who wouldn't wake up or respond to any of Izuku's attempts. This would leave tears to start pouring out of his face as we would flash forward to Izuku inside of a hospital van, right next to his father, who at the moment would be having a bunch of nurses fighting to save Aizawa's life. Izuku eventually making it to the hospital, where sitting in the waiting lounge, Izuku would wait there until midnight finally would arrive, asking if Izuku's okay. Izuku's, having tears fall down his face as she would hug him, and then he would ask if he's gonna be fine. She would say that his dad's a fighter, and Suzuku and her would wait there for the next 8 hours. And once that would happen, the doctors would come outside telling them that Aizawa needed a lung transplant immediately, saying that unfortunately, hero or not, the waiting list runs about a year long, and the state that Aizawa's in, he'll likely not make it another week. Izuku would be like, give him one of mine. I should be compatible. I'm his son. I have his hair. I have his quirk. There's no reason I won't have his kidneys. Midnight telling Izuku that he doesn't have to do this, saying that she'll do it. Both of them getting tested to see if they're, match, and Izuku being the perfect match. At this, Izuku would pretty much end up telling the doctors that no matter what his mom says, he's gonna do it. Midnight thanking him as Izuku would go under the surgery, and by the next day, Izuku would wake up to see Aizawa in the bed right next to him, breathing slowly as he would ask Izuku if he's finally up. Izuku turning to him as he would say, yeah, I'm awake. Aizawa asking him why in the world he thought it was a good idea to give him his kidney. Izuku telling him that that's what heroes do, right? Laughing a bit, being like, ah, that hurts. Turning to Aizawa, who would pretty much smile. It's at this point that Recovery Girl would end up entering the room, and turning to Eraserhead and Izuku, she would kiss the two of them, asking why they had to go out there and get hurt as bad as they did. Izuku smiling as, the healing process would be much faster, but now he completely loses it. He passes out unconscious. Eraserhead fighting these effects as he would thank Recovery Girl and finally pass out too. This would lead to, I want to say, about a 1-week break from UA, where Izuku and Aizawa mainly would both be recovering from their surgeries. Izuku being back to 100% after about a day, and Aizawa taking about the entire week for him to be able to even think about going back to UA. So, as soon as the first day of class would finally begin for Izuku, his classmates would ask what happened to his dad, all, being around him saying that likely they're going to be having a substitute teacher for today, when suddenly Aizawa would walk into the classroom, bandages covering his face, his side, like he's basically just bandaged up everywhere, and bro's on crutches at the moment, right? They're like, Mr. Aizawa, as the entirety of the class would be like, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be at home resting? Him saying that he doesn't exactly have that luxury. And then going on to explain to them that today they're going to be studying on, yada yada yada. He pretty much gives them an entire lesson plan, eventually at the end of it telling them about the UA Sports Festival and how that's not going to get cancelled, with the entirety of Class 1A getting excited, and Deku wondering how he's going to perform during that thing, noting that he doesn't exactly stand too much of a chance considering he's been watching that thing happen for ever since he can remember. He's always in the stands thanks to his mom Midnight, and from what he can remember, this test doesn't exactly help Izuku's case. It's one of those events that helps out people with flashy quirks, but for somebody like him, all he has is a scarf and erasure, what good is it going to do for him, he would think? Being one of the first to walk out of the classroom since he's deep in thought, when suddenly noticing a horde of people around him, Izuku would kind of just walk on by. Somebody calling out, acting like you can't see us? Which finally catches the attention of Deku, who, looking up, would then see Shinso begin to just yap and yap and yap about how nice it must be to be part of the hero course, saying to not lower their guard just because they're general course students. As Deku ignoring Shinso and not caring about that since he has bigger problems, he would make his way to the cafeteria, sitting down as Uraraka would ask Izuku, why the long face? I mean, the sports festival's coming up. Izuku saying, yeah, it's coming up, but that doesn't mean everyone's gonna do well. I mean, it's more for flashy quirks. I should know. I've been in attendance for the past, 6 years. Her being like, well, whatever. You're still gonna do your best, right? And that's what matters. Kind of cheering up Deku, who'd be like, do your best, do your best. Deku finally getting out of the slums as he then turning towards Uraraka would thank her, and we would then get a little bit of a time skip to when the UA Sports Festival actually starts. Which, by the way, now that I realize, I never covered what happened to the villains. Which in this timeline actually completely resulted in the capturing of Kurigiri, Shigaraki, the Nomu, and all the fighter villains, what with All Might and the rest of the heroes arriving. So, yeah. That's a plus for Deku being a hero in this timeline. But yeah, no, like I was saying, UA Sports Festival. As soon as this event would all start, the audience would be greeted to a speech from Bakugo, which wasn't exactly too uplifting, followed by the obstacle course. That, interestingly enough, Izuku does pretty decent on. I mean, in the original timeline, we see the dude run across everything and doing his best with the little tools that he has access to. But here, things are going to be a little different for Deku, because this version of Izuku can actually use his quirk in a bit of a different way than Aizawa can. He's a next-generation quirk user, which obviously means that his quirk erasure would have actually gone some upgrades and a couple of adaptations, with one of them being the fact that Deku doesn't actually need to worry about the whole blinking thing, meaning that once once Deku looks at you, your quirk is erased, and the only way to actually get out of that is by pretty much exiting his radius, because in this version of the events, he can't exactly just look at you and then erase your quirk forever, right? Like, there has to be a limit. There is a limit, and the limit for the quirk's erasure is about 5 minutes. But if you're inside of Deku's quirk radius thing, then that limit is pretty much indefinite until Deku decides you can have your quirk back, which is a pretty sick version of erasure, but mind you, the radius is not exactly too massive, which means that as soon as this event would start, it would pretty much just be a race between a bunch of teenagers who can't even use their quirks. Bakugo crying out, "Turn off your damn quirk, Deku!" trying to run towards him and like beat him up, but Deku getting a head start on everybody else would be smiling, knowing that like this, there might be a chance for him to show off after all. Present Mike screaming, "And it looks like just like that, Eraserhead's protege has started everything off. He managed to erase everybody's quirks there. Isn't that impressive, Aizawa?" Aizawa would be like, "It's only impressive if he wins." Izuku making his way towards the front of the class, as using his scarf, he would use it to maneuver within the pit, eventually arriving past the robots and finally making his way to the landmine section, which Deku, due to the fact that he is one of the first people there, means that he's gonna have to pretty much just risk it. And so being one of the main players towards the front, Deku would decide on one path, just kind of jumping and like being careful with his steps, slowing down significantly as Mei Hatsume, who using her babies, would blitz right past her, being like, "Thanks, kid!" You know, all the while Deku would look up and be like, "Bruh, well there goes my first place." Watching on as bombs would start exploding around him, and Deku was just like, nah, I gotta go. At this point, Deku would run past the finish line and would actually end up getting like 5th place due to two things. One, Mei Hatsume would have gone first, and two, that landmine section would have greatly slowed down his progress. And then the people who had like more like who were just like physically like capable due to the fact that their quirks made them like that, were able to run on by past Izuku. People like Mina, who's naturally fast, and maybe Shoji, who using his, you know, like morphing quirk would have had help, and then that one guy with the beast quirk, he would have gotten like 2nd place. So yeah, Deku would have pretty much made that first event boring, which Deku would definitely hear about, what with the crowd being like, "Come on, kid, turn off your stupid quirk, we want to see other people's quirks." Deku, you know, kind of feeling bad, you know, hearing some of the boos in the distance, as Aizawa would tell the crowd to all shut up, saying that in this event, everyone, and he means everyone, is going to be using their quirks to their own advantage. And if the kid's quirk is leveling the playing field, then that's what he's going to do. Somebody screaming out, "Shut up! You don't know anything, you're just saying that because he's your son!" Aizawa just kind of like sighing as he's just like, whatever, these people will never learn. Leading us to the next event, which Deku would actually be able to use his quirk pretty effectively in, because of the fact that he's able to cancel people's quirks. So in case anybody's ever trying to like defend themselves from them trying to steal their headbands, Deku's able to pretty much just use that quirk to get rid of their quirks and just rush in there and take their headbands, making them, you know, pretty much helpless. Also using his scarf to rip them out of some people's, as, you know, Deku actually ends up winning the cavalry battle in 2nd place. The team with the 1 million point headband getting first, as we would then get into the 1v1 battles, which are pretty interesting in this timeline of events, because remember, a lot of Deku's ability relies on, you know, whether he can get his quirk active first. And due to the nature of the fact that the opponents actually like stare off against each other before they actually start the fight, Deku's always, and I do mean always, gonna be having the advantage. Meaning that during his first battle with Shinso, the whole mind control stuff won't even matter because he won't even have access to that. Meaning that Deku could talk to Shinso if he wants, but I don't think he will, just due to the way that he was raised in this timeline. So that's a KO. Then we get into Suzuku's 2nd battle against Todoroki, which, like I said, due to Todoroki not having his fire or ice, he would be outclassed completely, having learned that he relies on his quirk way too much. And so after Deku would take him out, he would move on to the 3rd round against Tenya Ida, who, like in the original, would end up bowing out due to what happened to his older brother, meaning that Deku would have made it all the way to the finals, and he still has yet to lose a single hand-to-hand fight, coming into contact with Bakugo for the final one, as he would start everything off by telling Izuku that last time he beat him because he wasn't ready for his quirk, but this time he will be. And he's been working on some martial arts as well. Rushing to the direction of Izuku, as he would throw a punch, Izuku dodging it, and then Bakugo using like his elbow to dodge the blow that he knew Izuku was gonna throw. Deku smirking as the two boys would get into it at the center of the ring. Deku then deciding that it's over, grabbing onto Bakugo's leg and pulling on it. Bakugo falling onto the ground as catching himself with both arms, he then uses other loose leg to kick to the direction of Izuku, who dodging out of the way would then grab Bakugo's leg, put it in a lock, and then pretty much tell Bakugo to like tap out. Bakugo likely fighting against it for a second, but as soon as Deku starts pulling harder and harder, leaving Bakugo to realize like he's genuinely gonna snap that thing, Bakugo would finally like snap out of it, being like, nah, hex, nah, like I'm not about to have a broken leg. So with all those matches finally having been over and Deku getting through all of them with very much so ease, we would have him be the victor of the UA Sports Festival event. Aizawa having a massive smile underneath his bandages, knowing that if that was him during his first year, there's no way he would have even made it to the 1v1 battles. But his son, he's definitely made great use of the quirk and the training and all the tools he's given him access to. He's growing into himself. And with the UA Sports Festival events finally being over, and obviously the villains having seen the whole thing, All For One would very much so have a very keen interest on Izuku, viewing his quirk as something that he must have, leaving us now to wonder if that's something that could possibly happen in the future. But for now, let's focus on the hero killer arc, which would start pretty quickly, and due to Deku having actually won the entirety of the sports festival, this means that he would likely get a lot of offers, but ultimately he would end up accepting the one from Aizawa, seeing as he's literally the person who's been training him his whole life, and why stop now? And so, Deku would finally get to live out the dream of going on a hero patrol with Aizawa during the nighttime, understanding two things. One, that his father's pretty damn cool, and two, why he's so freaking tired. I mean, not only is he a school teacher by day, but at nighttime he's out there kicking villains' butts, and doing it pretty effectively, might I add. So, by the end of the hero internship opportunities, we would now have Izuku and Aizawa growing closer as ever, as Izuku would have gone way stronger over that course in time and understood more tactics when it comes to fighting opponents, using the cover of nighttime to his advantage, although Ida on the other side of Hosu would have likely been trying to get himself killed. But luckily for the class, because Shigaraki isn't exactly out of Tartarus quite yet, this would likely mean that without the distraction of the Nomus, Ida would never have an opportunity to get free from Manual. And so we never get the confrontation between Ida and the hero killer, meaning that the internship opportunity stuff finally comes and goes, and we're able to now focus in on what happens after that. The rescue training race. Deku using a scarf to maneuver around everything like the city portion, as finding Aizawa second after Sarah, who obviously using his tape would be able to get there first, would end up pretty much noting that Sarah's mobility with his tape is just way better than his overall, and he needs to work on that, his mobility, leaving Deku to then make his way towards Mei Hatsume's lab, where he would get exploded on, followed by having Mei Hatsume laying on top of him being like, is there any reason you're crushing me? With her being like, oh, sorry about that, kind of getting up. Deku recognizing her as the one who actually took first place from him in the obstacle race, as Izuku then seeing that Araki and Ida were there, he would say hi to them, going on to ask her if she has anything that he could use for mobility, her pretty much showing him a bunch of random babies, with Deku be like, no, I think I'm good. It's at this point that Izuku would pretty much exit the area, and he would bump into his father, who would ask him what he was trying to look into in the support course. Izuku telling him that he was trying to get some more mobility, but now that he thinks about it, he probably won't find anything there. Aizawa telling him that if he's looking for mobility, maybe he can take an idea his mother gave him a long time ago. She has suggested to him to ride around on a motorcycle whenever he's trying to make his way to crime scenes, but that just really wasn't his style, asking if maybe that's more so Deku's vibe. And Deku, he'd be like, wait, that's actually a sick idea. Maybe I could do that. What if we're able to create a motorcycle that's actually, it can transform? Say for instance, it can be in my pocket, and I can pretty much throw it down, and it transforms into a little, motorcycle. A pink-haired girl being behind him, she's like, so, you want a morphing bike, I see. I can start working on that immediately. Deku be like, what? I didn't ask you. Her be like, nope, I'm doing it. Izuku be like, well, I guess I'm riding a crazy lady's bike. Aizawa, looking towards him, as Deku following behind him would then go on to ask his father what he thinks about the idea he posed to him during his time with his internship. Aizawa turning to Deku as he would tell him that if he wants to use those kinds of weapons, to be his guest, but to remember that he's playing with fire. Izuku turning towards his father and acknowledging that, yeah, that might be the case, but what happens the next time that he has to fight against some hulking beast that he can't do anything against? There's gonna be some villains out there that he won't be able to beat up by simply punching or kicking them or even trying to restrain them. Aizawa saying he knows, but that's what other heroes are for, to lean on each other. Izuku telling him that there might come a time where he won't have that chance. So, going back to the general course area, he would go on to ask what licenses he would exactly need in order to maybe carry some pistols. Power Lord pausing for a second as he would ask Izuku why he would need those. Deku pretty much just telling him that there's gonna come a time where his kicks and punches and scarf won't do anything, and in that time he might have to use some weapons. The teacher telling him that as far as that goes, as long as he's at UA, he won't be capable of using real ones, but he does have these pellet ones available if he wants them. They're still deadly, but not as deadly, and the likelihood you'll go on to kill somebody with these weapons is not so high. So use these, but still, kid, use caution when you're using them. Going on to tell him that a lot of the police force actually uses these. Izuku smiling as he would pretty much thank Power Loader and walk out of that room. It's here that Izuku would start to wonder what it is about heroes having such a disdain for guns. Heroes like Snipe and even Lady Nagant, who was a hero back in the day, used weapons like this, and no one said anything to them. What's so wrong with it, Deku would think. Turning the corner as finally walking by the classroom of Snipe, Izuku would walk inside, asking the teacher if he has, any time to talk. And since he's like a third hero teacher, he would end up asking the young boy what he's doing here. Is he lost? Izuku telling him no, just he has a question. Snipe saying, fire away, kid. Deku turning to him as he would say, well, I was just wondering, why is it that guns are so looked down upon by some heroes? Snipe realizing, you want to get into gunslinging, I see. Well, to tell you the truth, kid, a lot of people have died because of guns in the past when heroes didn't exactly have what it took. And that's why there's such a disdain for them. That's why you need to know how to aim and use them properly. Izuku's saying he knows that, but it's not like he's gonna be all gun happy and start shooting people in the face. Snipe saying that a lot of heroes think that it's very looked down upon, but so long as he's able to get the job done, he doesn't think there's anything wrong with it. Izuku asking if he can teach him how to use one. Snipe nodding as he would tell him that he just might be able to, explaining that the next time that he has a hero opportunity, he'll throw in an internship. Izuku nodding as Snipe would end up telling him to run along now. It's at this point that we would see Izuku going back to class, where finally talking amongst the rest of his classmates, he would go on to ask how they're feeling about the finals coming up. Everybody expressing how, pretty much freaked out about them they are, as Deku would say that they shouldn't really worry too much. After all, they still have about a week to think about them. Going on to say that maybe they could just have some group study sessions together. Everybody being like, yeah, that'll help. With Momo being like, can we hold them at my place? And Izuku being like, why not? At this, the group would pretty much go on to do exactly what they would in the original timeline, and we would now get the final exam arc playing out. This being pretty interesting for Izuku, because in this timeline, he has an ability that can quite literally render All Might into a Small Might form, which means that there's a very, very, very strong likelihood that Deku is not going to be going up against him. And instead, he would likely actually go up against his father, alongside Momo Yaoyorozu, with Todoroki and Deku being replaced in this timeline. This means that Bakugo and Todoroki would go on to face All Might, and I'm not gonna lie to y'all, that is just a bloodbath for Todoroki and Bakugo. Those two are gonna get absolutely stomped. But when it comes to Deku and Momo, they would have a pretty interesting plan going into it. Izuku saying that when it comes to hand-to-hand combat, he can somewhat keep up with his father, but he needs to be honest. His dad has a massive edge against him. Going on to tell Momo that the second that he gets there, he's likely going to try to cancel their quirks. Explaining that when that happens, Momo's job is to get them out of range so that Izuku could catch Aizawa off guard. Because if they can somehow manage to turn his quirk off before they can turn off theirs, then they'll be in a good spot. Telling Momo to create some weapons for them because they're likely going to be facing off against them. And also saying that if they're going to fight off against his dad, they're also going to be needing the advantage of the terrain. So, with both of them making their way throughout the entire area of the city, Izuku knowing that he doesn't want to pass via just running out, Aizawa would start search for them, eventually turning off the quirk of Momo as Izuku would come in out of nowhere from a high vantage point and leap down, wrapping his scarf onto one of the lampposts as finally flinging down to the ground, Izuku would have activated his own quirk on Aizawa, canceling his father's quirk and telling him how he likes this, throwing his scarf to the direction of Aizawa, who would counter by doing the same, each scarf interlocking with each other as Izuku would pull, being dragged by his father, who in this moment would take the scarf, Izuku letting it go. This is when calling out to Momo, she would say right, tossing a shield at Deku as he would unholster his gun and start aiming it at the lower half of Aizawa's body, blaring off a multitude of projectiles, all the while Momo would get in close range, Aizawa having to run for cover as Izuku would make chase, saying, "Give me that extra scarf!" Her having created exactly a replica of what Aizawa uses, as Deku would begin to chase after Aizawa, telling him that he's playing the role of villain quite well, swinging as Aizawa would kick Izuku in the stomach, sending him crashing down. At this, Izuku would get back up and hold out a guard position, blocking the kick from Aizawa as Momo, coming in towards the corner, would use her bow staff. Izuku and Momo both smiling at each other as they would get into a combo rumble-like attack with Aizawa. Izuku using his gun to blare a couple of shots at him, weakening him, as he finally getting close range quarters with Aizawa, would swipe at the leg before slamming his hand on his chest and holding him down, giving just enough time for Momo to come in with some handcuffs and put him down. At this point, Izuku and Momo would both kind of have like a little high-five moment as the two would celebrate their victory. Aizawa smiling is on the ground, he would tell his son to undo these, telling him of course he passed. After this arc would finally finish, we would now get the very beginning of the Forest Camp arc, and due to the fact that the villains are actually still in Tartarus, and I'd like to think that this is around the time that the villains would actually have a little bit of a breakout arc, that's what we're going to be focusing on now. All for One using all of the Nomu and Dr. Garaki to open a warp gate portal straight to the coordinates of the actual Tartarus himself, him beginning to break down a multitude of different villains and use a couple of actual workers on the inside to get the best outcome possible, opening all of the gates and killing a multitude of the workers, as finally having broken into the jail and gone a multitude of villains to actually join to his side, All for One would break out Shigaraki, who now finally at his side, flames erupting at the prison. All for One would ask them whether they would like to join him or remain here on this hell-stricken island. Most of the villains obviously taking the opportunity to join All for One, as we would have the villain amass an army way larger than the one that we get originally, Kurogiri finally being warped out of there, with us focusing on the students' point of view of them pretty much getting the news, them all getting ready for bed after pretty much like their 5th hard day of training, as Momo would go on to tell the entirety of the class to look at the news. It's here that they would turn on a TV and multiple shots would show of the prison break, a bunch of dead security guards, a bunch of dead villains who had pretty much had bones to pick with each other, and a multitude of names of the villains that were broken out. Izuku watching on as he would hope that Shigaraki and Kurogiri weren't among them, but of course they were. And after all of this would finally be discovered, the students would finish this time, pretty much all having a bit of a somber mood since knowing that those villains had already previously attacked them and there's nothing to stop that from happening again. Everybody would be on high alert, knowing that they have to train even harder than ever. Us now going back to UA, where we're able to focus on the provisional licensing exam. Izuku going in and actually deciding that instead of sticking with his classroom, he would like to play the stealth game. And so, picking off a random student, he would end up using his erasure quirk to make the battle easy as ever, knocking him out and eliminating the student, assuring his pass. And with Izuku having the erasure quirk, I can see that whole little confrontation with Gang Orca in which Deku would get involved in being way easier. I mean, Deku's quirk is just made to be on the front lines instead of providing aid, so that's exactly what he would do. And canceling Gang Orca is making it pretty easy for Todoroki and Aizawa, or not Aizawa, but Inasa to actually take down the villain. They would successfully pass, Todoroki actually not having to go through remedial course, and Bakugo being the only one who has to do that, which I personally think is just hilarious. But yeah, no, that's how this arc would play out. Meaning that we're now able to kind of just jump cut to what happens with the events of the overhaul arc. The students all going on to meet the big three, Mirio once again challenging the entirety of the class, and all of the students making their way to the gymnasium, them all talking about how cocky this guy has to be in order to think that he can beat them all. But as Aizawa would turn to Deku and tell him that he's actually going to be pulled out of this event, Izuku would wonder why that is, asking Aizawa why he can't participate, him telling him that if he did, this test would be too easy. Izuku watching on as his classmates would promise that they'll win without him, and all of them, including Todoroki, getting absolutely moshed by Mirio. Which, by the way, bro, Mirio's quirk, oh my, it's so freaking tough. But yeah, no, Mirio would absolutely slaughter the entirety of Class 1A, and as soon as that, pretty much performance would be over, Deku would understand entirely why he wasn't allowed to participate, being told by Aizawa that had he participated, they likely would have ended up winning via him not having any access to his quirk. And with Mirio's showing finally being over, we would have all the students talking about who they're going to be entering. Aizawa knowing already that Izuku had decided to take on the Snipe Hero's opportunity, seeing as he wanted to learn how to actually use a weapon. But Izuku thinks that it's kind of annoying having to reach down for guns, reload them, and do all that. So, Izuku would actually have had a very specific tool made for him. Two guns that are actually placed on his arms. They act kind of like gun bracelets, and once they're activated by pretty much clicking a button on his wrist, kind of like doing the Spider-Man motion, two gun like little minigun things pop out from his hands, which are able to shoot like pellets towards the direction of villains. Obviously not deadly, but because of the sheer amount of them that Izuku can fire off at somebody, he can A, keep them at a distance, and B, dwindle them down as the battle goes on. And with Snipe's tutelage during the course of this, it would help Deku to learn how to use a gun, when and where not to aim. Izuku actually learning a lot, spending a lot of time learning the human anatomy, and being taught by Snipe, literally shown a bunch of his videos as how to use them, using the state-of-the-art, like training facility that Snipe uses, as he would go on to tell Izuku that he believes he's going to be an incredible hero when all is said and done. Izuku, smiling, is formulating a relationship with a teacher that typically doesn't show up in these videos. Izuku would finish his internship opportunity, which is now where a lot of you guys are probably wondering, okay, but what about, Overhaul? What the heck happens there? Two things can happen. Number one, either because Izuku doesn't actually go intern with Night Eye, this means that Mirio might not even go on the same path that would lead him to bumping into Eri, so that could straight up not happen, or the more likely outcome, due to the fact that Izuku never would be the reciprocator of One for All, Mirio would be. So regardless of how you really want to spin it, once Mirio uses his quirk permeation in tandem with whatever percentage you believe Mirio could get to, which I personally believe is at bare minimum 70% just because of how ripped he is, he would easily be able to take down Overhaul, and it wouldn't even be a challenge, like genuinely. All it takes is one punch from Mirio, and Overhaul would have absolutely zero chances to get through that. Because mind you, Mirio is the perfect hero. A hero that you can't touch and can quite literally just phase through any wall, getting to Eri as fast as possible. I mean, it's not even a challenge for Mirio at this point, meaning that this entire arc pretty much just gets completely eliminated, and we're able to focus instead on the final war arc, which would be happening soon. What with the students eventually having a Class 1A versus Class 1B event, in which Deku, being paired up with the original team that he would have in the normal story, he would be paired up with Mineta, Mina, Uraraka, and he would face off against Momo, the girl with the red hero outfit from Class 1B, little short dude, and the girl who can shrink and grow things. Not Shinso, because in this timeline of events, since Aizawa already has Deku, I just don't see a world in which he pours time into Shinso having to focus on Izuku, meaning that unfortunately for our boy Shinso, he would likely have ended up transferring to another school and probably be trained under, somebody else, or he would straight up just never become a hero, which sucks to say, but I mean, it's just the truth. And so, with this test all beginning, we immediately jump into it with Mina using his sticky balls to climb up a building and pretty much tell the classroom that he doesn't see anybody. That is, until suddenly a piece of metal would come flying towards the direction of Mineta, expanding as it would and knocking the dude out. This would alert to Mina, Uraraka, and Izuku that they have trouble or company coming, as Izuku would tell Uraraka to use his quirk on him and lift him into the air. Him flying above it all is using his erasure quirk, he would use it on the other team, turning the entirety of a battle into a 3v4, in which they would do very well on, considering the fact that Izuku's there. He's pretty much one of the best hand-to-hand fighters. And then we obviously have Uraraka, who having still gone under the gunhead martial arts, I would likely see her whooping Monoma, taking him down easily, as Izuku and Mina would tag team the rest of the remaining students. And as they would finally have defeated them, and the class would begin cheering, this is when out of nowhere a purple warp gate would arrive at the center of everything. Deku looking at it, as in shock, Izuku would realize who this would be. Canceling the quirk occurring really immediately, But unfortunately for him, this wouldn't be all that was necessary, because the portals that Kurogiri would have opened for the rest of the villains would have already been there, and Kurogiri would say that it's nice to see him again. Izuku watching on as a high-end Nomu flies to his direction, grabs him by the face and slams him directly into a concrete wall. This would knock out Izuku, who being taken out of the battle completely would leave the rest of the Class A students and teachers all to do their best in the fight. But with all these Nomus having been brought into the equation, All Might would be left to be the one handling 5 high-end Nomus, struggling to fight each and every...
Is helpless in this case. Is irresistible. She's body. What? And then he said, devour me. I need a Cheez-It, Daddy.
Cravings can happen anywhere. Want it, need it, cheese it.
Smart founders know something most people miss. Get your domain name even if you're not ready to launch your business. With Wix, you can grab yours now and then get to work. Here's why it matters. Back in 2019, I had this killer business idea, but I delayed getting the domain name because I wasn't ready. That was a huge mistake. Someone else grabbed it, built the exact same business I planned, and now they're making all the money that I could have been making. And that's why I'm sharing this. Locking down your domain name is crucial, and on Wix, it's super fast. They handle all the tricky tech stuff for you, making it seamless. And honestly, having a domain name gives your idea instant credibility. A domain name isn't just a name, it's a way to claim your space and take your idea seriously. Because once it's taken, you're stuck paying a premier price for it or losing it. So go to Wix right now, search your idea. If the domain is available, grab it.
Single one of them until finally help would arrive in the big 3 of Class 1A, Nejire arriving to face off against some of the League of Villains higher-arc members, Sun Eater arriving to provide backup to Deku, who would actually have Shigaraki right next to him in an attempt to kill him for the embarrassment that he gave to him last, as Sun Eater using his quirks would end up creating wings and octopus hands as he would drag Izuku towards his direction, telling the villain that he should go pick on someone else. Shigaraki getting angered as placing both hands onto the ground, he would attempt to decay the entire surrounding area. Izuku waking up at the last second as using his erasure quirk on Shigaraki, he would smirk towards him. Shigaraki pissed off as ever, who would say that he doesn't need his quirk, rushing into the direction of Deku before an ice wall would be created, and an explosion-filled Bakugo would enter the arena, smashing the explosion directly into the face of Shigaraki, who would be sent flying before regenerating. Mirio being busy helping All Might deal with the high-end Nomus and All for One himself, facing off against the biggest threat ever, as Izuku and the Big 3 would be dealt with handling Shigaraki. Izuku using his quirk to provide a hindrance towards him, as a flame pillar would erupt thanks to Todoroki blasting Shigaraki, who though feeling the pain, his regeneration factor would help him fight off against that. Bakugo coming in flying next, as he would blast a massive explosion at Shigaraki, probably saying something along the lines of, "Damn it, you two-toed bastard! You can't even blow someone up right!" Sending an explosion at Shigaraki that sends him crashing at a wall, as Sun Eater charging up the same explosion that he would have sent towards Shigaraki in the main storyline would blast at him, blowing off a majority of Shigaraki's body and simply just serving to hold off the villain until Mirio, who can actually defeat him, would finally arrive. This, however, is when we would have Toya finally arrive into the scene, telling Todoroki that he's finally here to kill his father's masterpiece. Blasting at his younger brother with a multitude of flames, Todoroki erupting a gigantic iceberg to block the attack, as Dabi would tell him that he always was father's favorite, and to see if there was truly some merit. Todoroki's face going from shock to terrified, making the connection that this was Dabi, and so, facing off against him, Todoroki would be eliminated from the fight and holding off Shigaraki, as some hero teachers would finally make their way there, recognizing the threat that is Tomura, and as every single person would fight against him, Shigaraki would be focused on one goal: killing Izuku. Now, not only for the embarrassment of the USJ, but also for the fact that if not for him, he would be capable of killing everybody else right now. And as Shigaraki would fight in an attempt to get closer and closer, Tamaki using his wings would end up flying Izuku into the air, Shigaraki leaping after him, as suddenly a scarf would wrap around his leg, Aizawa having grabbed onto him, as Aizawa would be dragged up into the air, and out of nowhere, Man Beast would grab onto Aizawa's legs, a student in Class 1B be, dragging him down and using all of his strength. Shigaraki pissed as ever as Izuku would smile, and not only would Izuku now be erasing his quirk, but even Aizawa, pissing off Shigaraki, who would now realize that even if he takes one of them down, he needs to take them both down now. Kind of like the Ender Dragon, I guess you could say. But with the fight amping up, with All Might and Mirio on one side of the battlefield destroying Nomu after Nomu, eventually All Might would be left to handle All for One, with Mirio phasing into the battlefield and slamming his fist directly into Shigaraki, who would be held down at that moment, him being sent flying into the air, Mirio flying after him, as we would see him cup both hands together and slam them directly into Shigaraki's back, creating a 20-foot crater. Aizawa's quirk deactivating because he had a blink, with Mirio apologizing for that, and then slamming a multitude of different punches at Shigaraki that would pretty much dig them down into the ground, each punch being stronger than the last one, with Mirio eventually punching Shigaraki so deep into the ground that they eventually get to the molten lava section of it, him phasing most of his body as he would punch Shigaraki into molten lava, eradicating him permanently, with him leaping back out of the ground, his hero costume being burnt just from the actual heat of the lava itself, as Mirio would then go on to help take out the rest of the Nomus, and Aizawa would rush to Izuku's aid. Here, he would ask Izuku how he's holding up, who turning towards him would tell him that he's had better days. The entirety of Class 1A having managed to somehow hold off the attack thanks to Mirio, All Might, and even the Big Three, with us having a major scale event that would actually likely lead to the shutting down of UA for at least a couple of months, giving Izuku just enough time, not gonna lie, way more than enough time, to actually heal up from his injuries. And with the threat of the League of Villains being taken out, Overhaul being taken out, and likely even Radesho's army whole thing being taken out due to Shigaraki, this would mean that we would actually end up pretty much finishing off the entirety of the story of MHA, which I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty happy with how this one went. I know that that final battle was not exactly what you guys expected, but keep in mind, Deku's quirk at the end of the day is just not made for something like that. He just straight up isn't. But what he would have been made for perfectly would have actually been like a really sick All for One versus Deku fight, where he eliminated his quirk and basically reduced him to nothing, fighting him in hand-to-hand combat, where All for One having absolutely zero strength boost or anything like that would actually low-key have gone folded like a pancake. It would have been pretty cool also to see like a dual Izuku and Aizawa fight, kind of like a Son Goku and Gohan type of thing, but I mean, there was really no situation that I could have actually made for this sort of fit that in. Oh, and one more fight that I wish I would have gone to cover was actually going to be like the Muscular versus Deku fight, but just because of how the villains were actually held in Tartarus, I just wasn't able to fit that into the story. But yeah, no, let me know what you guys thought about this one down below in the comment section. I had a ton of fun making it, and I think this one's going to be dropping on Friday, if not maybe Saturday, but regardless of what it is, expect a video Friday, Saturday, and maybe Sunday. But yeah, no, with that being said and everything being out of the way, ladies and gentlemen, it has been your boy Zether, and I am out. Peace.
For 250 years, this land has shaped who we are. Generation to generation, fishing has always been part of the American story. Today, Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's carry on that tradition with our biggest fishing and boating sale of the year, the Spring Classic Fishing Sale. Trade in your old rotten reel for a new one. Plus, club members enjoy special financing. Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's, celebrating 250 years of freedom, family, and fishing.
スイカのお砂糖大至急です。
Men don't do basic hydration. We need super hydration. Old Spice Super Hydration. Vitamin booster for 24/7 healthier looking skin.
Babe, are you using all the Old Spice?
お砂糖もなしにどうやって生きていけというのですか。お腹が空きましたね。ちゃんとお弁当を持ちましたか。大丈夫ですよ。気がついてます。どうしました？私があんまり可愛いからびっくりしちゃったんですか？偉大なるご主人様に敬礼！ご主人様。どこに行きます？
Thank you, listen.
何でもおっしゃってくださいね。ペコちゃんだな。これお腹ペコちゃんだな。これこのまま放っておくとお腹空きすぎて死んじゃうかもしれないな。か弱い私が大ピンチですよ、ご主人様。ご主人様は本当に素晴らしいお方です。今日も頑張りましょう。ね。今日も頑張りましょう。ね。砂糖がないなら代わりにケーキを食べればいいじゃない。いいじゃない。じゃない。ご主人様に一生ついていきます。どこに行きます？ご主人様にお仕えできて私幸せです。ご主人様大好きです。偉大なるご主人様に敬礼。偉大なるご主人様に敬礼。あまり難しく考えちゃダメですよ。何でもおっしゃってくださいね。何でもおっしゃってくださいね。この命、ご主人様のために捧げますね。ご主人様は本当に素晴らしいお方です。頼りにしてくださいね。スイカのお砂糖を大至急です。リンゴでももぎに行きませんか？ご主人様は本当に素晴らしいお方です。この命、ご主人様の